All right, Alyssa, let's take a look at your essay. So, starting with your introduction, there are two things I want to talk to you about, and the first is going to be with the comma splice. There's a comma splice grammar concern, and then I want to talk about your thesis organization a little bit. So, starting off with your paper right away, and those are the two kind of things you can fix, but how you start off the essay is pretty good. Can strike at any time, and the panic caused by it can spread like wildfire in today's society. So I think this is a pretty good image to get us started with what mass hysteria is. However, you do have a comma splice in your intro, and you do have it here. So we have in the English language independent clauses, which are sentences that can stand alone by itself. So mass hysteria can strike at any time. That is one complete sentence. And then the panic caused by it can spread like wildfire in today's society. That is also a complete sentence. So you have a comma splice when you combine two independent clauses with just a comma. And you have it right here and you have it right down here, but I'll explain what's going on down here in a moment. So this right here, you can just substitute the word and or put some kind of coordinating or subordinating conjunction um, in the middle, or you could use it to start. But the intro is pretty good, and I like how the intro goes from the hook that you have into a little bit about how this can affect anyone, and then the definition, and then you talk about here's a specific example of it. But what's good about this, and this is where it gets tricky, is sometimes people will throw in things in the intro that is, here's this very, very, very specific example, but you kind of bring it broad where you're like, here's this example from Arthur Miller that talks about how it would be there. And then this right here is your thesis. So sometimes the thesis can be the second to last sentence or towards the end of the intro. So this is fine. It's just this is a little bit long, so I would suggest maybe cutting this down, or maybe I'm not sure, maybe reordering it a little bit. But your thesis is pretty good. Today's society, mass hysteria is more important because of media's influence on society. Good. And then right here, even though you have this conjunction with but and you've got the correct punctuation, um, this right here, if you use the word and, it would be a comma rule with a series of a list, but the most recent presidential election in the United States involved mass hysteria provoked by the media. That's one whole sentence, comma. There are also many cases throughout history where the media has caused cases of mass hysteria to become more widespread. And that in itself is one sentence. So be aware that because you have these independent clauses, these two are not linked through a conjunction in any way, but this one is. So be aware of the comma splice there. And then honestly, with your introduction, you don't even need to address, well, it's just part of human nature. Don't worry about it. Just for your intro, focus on your perspective of the paper. All right, so as we move into your first body paragraph, I think you have a good, strong topic sentence and a good way to end it. So if you look at best examples of media influencing it is this, and then spreading mass hysteria using the media can have huge effects on big events that affect the whole world, like the presidential election. So this is pretty good. You have a good topic sentence and a good way to explain this down here. Let's talk about some of the grammary things and the examples you're doing. So this is a good example where you talk about Clinton's run for the presidency and how it was stopped by Republicans. I think you could be a little bit more specific with that, because even though you have read the essays, I think when you have things such as, let's talk about this for a second, spread rumors about a terrorist attack, and then people became hysterical, which is true. Republicans were more responsible, and then they casted the blame and it was proven false. So you have all these things, but I think every once in a while you could be a little bit more specific with what's going on. So you don't necessarily, for example, here have to say this was Benghazi and then have a further explanation with everything. But I think for your analysis to work a little bit stronger here, although the allegations were proven false, the use of the media did have effects because people now do not trust Clinton. You have some good analysis here. I think you're a little on the borderline of using more evidence than analysis, but with that in mind, I think you could just be a little bit more specific with it. So specifically talk maybe about how this went through Congress and she was found, whatever. And then put a comma here if you're going to use this because of that, so you're technically missing a comma here. And what I might explain here, you could add more detail, it's up to you, but she did win the popular vote. So the only reason that's why I'm saying you may want to throw something in here is because she did win the popular vote, so the majority of people who voted still may have trusted her. So just be aware of like maybe the wording on it. It's not a big deal right now, but just things to consider. So overall, I think you have a lot of good evidence in here to start. Good strong topic sentence, good way to wrap up the paragraph. Be aware of the commas there, and I think you could just be a little bit more specific with it and talk a little bit more on the media. Well, no, because you do have analysis here, but and it is a hard thing to do, but overall that is a pretty good first body paragraph. Okay. All right, and then as we move into your next body paragraph, this is a pretty good topic sentence in a way that I really like how you, okay, that's not what I wanted. I really like how you ended this paragraph. Media will spread mass hysteria for their own gain, because it's a really powerful way to wrap up this paragraph. And you do have some good analysis with it. What I want you to be careful of is you using this phrase, so because of this, because I think even though you've only used it 2 or 3 times, I think there's some stronger ways to enhance your vocabulary for this. So if we look at, so because of this, they let the people become hysterical, or something that was not true. Let's see, that is precisely what newspapers and... Oh, you're missing a word here. They did not want radio to compete with them. I think a stronger way, instead of saying so because of this, you could say as a result would be better. And it just really comes down to, sometimes in academic papers saying because of this, it gets a little bit, I don't want to say boring, but just a little lackluster in the sense of it's just a little overused from time to time, so that's just something you may want to consider with the paper. But other than that, this is a pretty good paragraph with good evidence with War of the Worlds. And as I was going through the articles again, I was a little bit leery about how people would use this article for the evidence, but you did a good job at that, so that is awesome to say. And then as we move on, noticing right away, I like how you're contrasting things, which is something that I was thinking about as I was going through the articles, and I was thinking about what we give you that's part of the 10th grade curriculum, and I was worried about how much the articles show that it's human nature. I don't think it's a big deal, but I think personally media does have an overlasting effect on hysteria, but it's hard, especially when those articles seem to sway a particular way. So I always tell students that you need to go with whatever is easier for you to write, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. But you do a really good job at this, and thank you for doing this, because this has me thinking of it in a good way. When you end the paragraph with, however, in modern times, the media is more potent in causing mass hysteria, that is really good, because that's very true. And the way you've pulled in evidence is good so far. So good way to start this and good way to end it. And as we look at this, you're right, we do have mass hysteria from so long ago, and you have the Crucible, and you talk about the results of the witch trials. Many people died, and it's more than human nature. Sorry, it's more human nature than media influence mass hysteria. So this is right. So this is part of the mass hysteria. The thing you need to be clear on with this is for your opposing side, right? So this is your opposing side. Good topic sentence, good way to look at it, but you don't refute it. And that's what you needed to do, is this is true, so you are refuting it. It's, in modern times, it's more potent, which is a good position for you to have good wording, but you need to bring in some kind of more evidence or analysis to counter this. And I think with some of the things you talked about is, I don't know, even consider this. Maybe your transition would be based on the Crucible and what's going on with Salem is people were still communicating. So that move into an example about how that communication spreads rampantly as we move with more modern forms of media, because you had really good examples before in your first two body paragraphs. And I think just incorporating one more into that body paragraph, that helps refute it, because that's part of what we're looking for with your opposition, is how are you refuting it. So, moving on to your conclusion. The media is more potent in creating mass hysteria, repeating it, good. And then you explain the rest of it, which is recapping the paper, which is good. This causes mass hysteria to spread through media quite easily and very quickly. We live in a world of politicians doing anything you got a misspelling. They can to bash their opponent, and fake news. You're missing a word here. So overall, with your grammar, while I'm on it, the only thing I'm noticing is there's two routine errors I'm noticing. A comma splice, and you're missing a few words here and there. Anything to bash their opponent, and maybe create or perpetrate fake news. You're missing a word here. You just need something there. It's not hard to believe that media would have the power to create mass hysteria in the world we live in today. So pretty good way to end your paper. I think it could be improved a little bit just because you've had really, really strong topic sentences and ways to end your paragraphs. And this one's a little bit more lackluster than the rest, but overall, Alyssa, your conclusion is good. You've got good word choice. Your transitions are good. Looking at it again, I think your thesis organization, you need to think about, just focus on your perspective for the introduction, especially when you get towards your thesis. Because sometimes in your introduction, you can be like, oh, there could be multiple sides and whatever it is. But then that's where you really want to focus on your perspective. And then you don't have the refuting part for the opposing side. And as far as grammar goes, you have the comma splicing and some missing words. But overall, good paper. You have some strong sentences and words, and good examples with it. I think you can do a little bit more analysis as we move forward. But all right.